we're building a plan. We're adjusting as we go, because this is not about grabbing a plan and holding on to it forever. Adjusting your plan regularly makes sense. And so right now we're trying to figure out the best way that we want to move forward. Welcome to the Teacher Money Show, the podcast dedicated to helping teachers navigate your unique financial challenges and unlock your financial superpowers. I'm your host, Sean Morgan, a full-time teacher. That's right, I teach every day just like you, and personal financial coach. And I'm here to help every teacher, whether you're a seasoned teacher looking for fresh insights or a new educator navigating your first paycheck, to have a richer wallet, classroom, and life. The contents of this podcast are informational in nature and are not legal or tax advice, and neither I nor my guests are engaged in the provision of legal, tax, or any other advice. You should not act upon this information without first seeking appropriate advice from an accountant, financial planner, lawyer, or other professional. I've got another great episode for you today with just me and you talking about investing. Investing is so crucial to our retirement plans, to growing our wealth in general. But sometimes we want to skip ahead to investing, actually putting the money to work before we've actually laid the groundwork. Today, we're going to talk about the groundwork necessary to be ready to start investing. It can take time to actually be ready to get money invested. So be aware that while investing is the goal, you don't want to rush to that goal, because you might miss out on some important things along the way that are going to make investing much harder later. So the first thing that I want you to consider when you are preparing to invest is, do I have an adequate emergency fund? Now, when you're just starting out, an emergency fund of $1,000 is recommended by Dave Ramsey. I've heard a recommendation of your minimum emergency fund being the amount of your highest deductible. So that way, if that emergency happens and you need to meet that deductible, then you have that money on hand. But then the conventional wisdom is to have 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses on hand for your emergency fund. So the range is quite wide on what we mean by have an emergency fund. I would say that having that minimum amount met of probably not $1,000, especially as things have gotten more expensive, but having that minimum amount of your highest deductible is probably a good place to begin. But then make sure that you continue to fund that emergency fund up to that 3 to 6 months amount as you're investing. So don't say, well, I'm investing now, I'm going to stop putting any money aside for emergencies. That can lead to some pretty sticky situations. Now, ask me how I know. Well, I know because this has been one of the things I've struggled with the most in my own money journey. I like to just get into it, start investing. And I've learned through sad experience that if I do not have an adequate emergency fund, it's going to make investing a lot more difficult when the problems arise. It's just super important to have more than enough set aside in case something comes up, because having an emergency come up can really derail your investing journey. So please don't do what I do. Learn from my mistakes. I'm learning from my mistakes as well. And make sure we have those 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses set aside, or at least on track to get there, right? You have that, maybe it's $6,000 or even $10,000, depending on the deductibles you have, ready in the wings, right? That's, a few months worth of expenses maybe. And, depending on your expenses, that might already be your 3 to 6 months. So if that's the case, maybe you want to just build up an adequate, $5,000, and then, keep growing that. But just having money on hand to handle an emergency before you go all in on investing is absolutely critical. The way I like to do this is I like to have money going into my emergency fund, right, automatically. So I set up an automatic payment into my emergency fund. And then that money that's going in, it's growing, growing, growing. And when I hit a certain amount, then I can start turning on the faucet from that emergency account into my investing accounts, right? So I have just money flowing, flowing, flowing. And then if my investment needs to stop because I've pulled money out of my emergency account, I just turn off that automation and keep funneling money in automatically to my emergency account until it's built back up, now that I've used some of it. And then once it's built back up to an adequate spot, I turn that investment valve back on. It's just an easy, a workflow basically to get from, your regular checking account to your emergency account to your investing automation. It works pretty well for that because you're going to have funds going along the way. And if you're putting like $1,000 into your emergency fund, then only $500 towards your investments, right? That's going to build your emergency fund as you go, while then growing your investment. It's just really important that when you have an emergency, you remember to turn off that automation into your investing or reduce it so that way you can really rebuild that emergency fund. Okay, the next thing to consider is whether or not you are in high interest debt. Now, having debt should not preclude you entirely from investing, but if you have a large amount of high interest debt, that is the time to really consider what is the better return. You can expect over the long term, of course, past performance is not indicative of future results, to get between 8 and 10% in the stock market. That's the benchmark people generally use for their investments. Could I get this 8 to 10% or better, then, or I'll just put it in the stock market, right? And in that case, if you have credit card debt, which is almost guaranteed to be above that 10%, paying off your credit card is going to be a higher rate of return for you than putting money in the stock market. Now, there are reasons why you might want to continue to invest even a little bit while paying down high interest debt. That compounding takes time, right? And the more you have in there, the more time it has to grow, the better that that curve upward will look for you. But still, I would not prioritize investing over an 8 or over a 10 to 12% interest rate, just because that 10 to 12% interest rate is going to compound in the other direction against you. So you want to make sure that you are paying that down as quickly as you can, because you're making more money by not spending as much money in interest by paying down that debt. Now, it gets a little fuzzier when you get into like a mortgage, which has, right now around a 6%, 6 to 7% interest rate, right? And, like student loan debt, which probably is in that same range. There's a lot of loans you can have that are much lower than that. In which case, investing over paying those down might be the right choice. However, that's not the only consideration, right? Your peace of mind, how much wiggle room you have, things like that can make paying down student loans or paying off a car, things like that, a better choice just for your own financial stability and your mind, making sure that you're not going to lose your mind as you're trying to invest, but also balance this debt. So that's the next thing to do, is just make sure that you have your debt covered, handled. I know that student loans, there's all sorts of stuff to consider with student loans, including public service loan forgiveness for teachers here. But just keeping in mind that paying things down might be better for your peace of mind than not paying them off. And then also considering that interest rate. So those are the two reasons to consider paying off debt before you invest, or at least having a plan to crush that debt soon and then start investing just a little bit. So if you had like, $1,000, maybe putting 500 towards your emergency fund to just, build that up, and then $400 towards debt and $100 towards investing, or maybe a bit more towards debt, because that's going to be, hurting you faster. You might even want to consider having, just a small emergency fund, and then, crushing your debt with $900 out of that. And then, rebuilding your emergency fund and going from there. So it's a process, a step-by-step thing to do to get from I'm in debt to I have an emergency fund to I have money to invest with. Okay, now that we are financially in a place to invest, we have maybe debts handled, we have an emergency fund built. We might have started, just doing a little bit of investing, getting in the habit, getting some compounding going, but we're ready to actually begin investing. We need to still pause and wait and figure things out. The first thing to do is to define your objective. Why do you want to invest? What are you investing for? Are you investing for an education for a child? Are you investing for your retirement? Are you investing to buy a home? Are you investing to grow your wealth for purchasing a car? What is the reason behind your investing? Because if you don't have an objective, if you don't know why you're investing, you might end up doing the wrong thing for your investment, right? So, for example, if you're trying to invest for a child's education, a 529 plan comes to mind as a very good thing to put money into. But if you don't know that that's what you're investing for, you don't have that mindset already of this is my objective, you might put your money in something else, which is a less powerful vehicle for investing for that objective. So choose your objective. Retirement, we've got retirement accounts for those. Buying a home, you don't want your money in a retirement account for buying a home because that's going to be harder to get a hold of and there might be penalties involved. There are some instances when you can pull money out of a retirement account to buy a home, but I wouldn't worry about that. I would have a separate investment for buying a home. Education, we just talked about that, right? That's going to be in a certain vehicle. And then, buying a car, you might just want to be saving up for that because it's going to be a pretty short-term thing that you're saving up for. And if you're putting money into an investment and then you need to buy a car, but that investment drops, you no longer have the funds, or you have to pull money out at a discount instead of at its premium value, and it's not worth as much. So there's just a number of things to consider. What are your goals? Do you need to have cash coming in before you retire? Do you need to have a bridge between your retirement date and your pension kicking in? All these things are things to consider when you're defining your objective. So, for example, I have a very lofty goal to be able to retire in the next 15 years. This is lofty because I've made a number of mistakes along the way, which I am trying to give back and share with you guys what you can do to avoid those mistakes. But it's also lofty because I've got expenses. I've got kids. Kids are a huge expense for us, and we don't want to just go all Spartan and just beans and rice, do nothing fun with our family to be able to reach this goal. So it's a pretty lofty goal to try and reach that 15-year be able to retire mark. And the reason why I have that goal is not because I dislike my job or I want to get out of teaching as fast as I can. It's because I have other things that I want to do with my life. I think that in 15 years, I'll have enjoyed teaching. I'll continue to love teaching, and I'll very much so be sad to step away from teaching. But what I'll have gained is time to do what I want to do, which is I want to do service. Through my church, we have opportunities to do service around the world, really, if we choose to do so. But you are funding that yourself because it's a service that you're providing. My wife and I both feel very strongly about doing this, and we want to start as soon as we can when we're still young enough to be able to give the energy necessary to serve well. So that is a great thing for us. That's our goal. That's my objective. And knowing that, yes, I want money in retirement accounts because I'll hit that age eventually, but I don't want all of my money in retirement accounts because if it's in a retirement account and I'm wanting to start using it at age, 45 or 50, that's going to be pretty difficult to get a hold of because of the penalties that I'll have. So I'm going to need to have a large amount of wealth somewhere else that is accessible for me to be able to use that money to bridge that gap between when I want to start using my wealth to do other things and the time that I can withdraw those penalty free from my 403b. So that is something to consider. Why am I pulling out this, or why am I building this wealth? When am I going to pull it out? What's the purpose? And knowing that is going to give you some clarity on what type of investments you're going to do. And then along those lines, you need to know the timeline for it, right? 5 years is not really an investment timeline. That is more of a saving timeline. So if you can, buy a house, get a down payment for a house within the next 5 years, investing that might not be the best choice because when you want to buy a house, everything might drop. Now there are ways to invest, get a little bit higher of a return than just having it sit in a saving account. We'll talk about some of those lower level investments in the coming months, but just keep in mind that the 5 years and under range is not really the investment range because long term the investments go up, but short term they're very volatile, which means they can go down when you don't want them to. But if you have a longer term goal, like you have a young child, saving 15, 20 years for them to be able to go to school, or you are wanting to invest for retirement in 20, 30 years, even 10 years away, that's a longer term goal. Being aware of that timeline you have can really inform the investment that you use. So just be very, very specific on your timeline. That's going to make a big difference. Like once again, with my same goal, I have that 15-year timeline, and knowing that I need to find something that yields well, that it might have to be a bit more risky as a result, to get me that yield. But also I need to be able to have the cash on hand at that time. So it's interesting, and I'll talk about the choices I'm making. We're actually talking about this. Me and my wife are right now, so we're gonna we're building a plan. We're adjusting as we go, because this is not about grabbing a plan and holding on to it forever. Adjusting your plan regularly makes sense. And so right now we're trying to figure out the best way that we want to move forward, considering once again that the setbacks that we've had that I've mentioned before on the podcast. So it's always important to make an adjustment and then say, okay, now what can we do to reach our goal? Okay. Speaking of setbacks, there's risk involved in investing. And I'm grateful in a way that I have had a pretty substantial setback in my investing journey, because that shows me that risk is real. And it's really easy to think it'll never happen to me, but it does. You can face the risks and the volatility of investing, and sometimes it doesn't work out for the best. And that's just life. So you need to ask yourself, how comfortable are you with the idea that you might actually lose your money? Which I have. Not all of my money, but I've lost some money on some investments recently, and it was a risk. I took a risk, and it didn't work out this time. So how comfortable are you with that? I'm still feeling like I should take risks again, because that's the way I'm going to move forward. And I'm a pretty risky guy. I'm going to be a little less risky now. I've learned some lessons on that, and I'm going to dial it down a little bit. But if you're not comfortable with risk, if the idea of you losing a single penny freaks you out, maybe you don't want to take the path that I've been taking. I'm still pretty much into taking the risk, because I know that's what brings the reward. But what you want needs to be very much so dialed into your investing journey. Are you a risk taker, or are you a safer person? Now, remember, if you're safer, you're going to have to generate more money to invest, because the returns are going to be less, most likely. But I mean, pretty darn safe is putting money into an index fund like a total market or an S&P 500, and getting that 8 to 10% according to the historical average, which past performance is not indicative of future results, etc. The 8% to 10% return, that's a pretty safe return. So that's what not risk looks like. But riskier investments can yield in that 20-25% range or more, depending on the types of risks you're taking. I mean, building a business can be considered an investment of sorts if you build it correctly, and that can yield thousands of percent return on your investment. Of course, there's time involved as well, but the point is that what you are willing to do and the risks you're willing to take will determine the investment strategy you're going to go on. Now, one more thing to consider is you're going to go to some advisor probably. I don't really want you to, but every advisor says you should take my quiz for how determining your risk tolerance. It's all just like, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about that? And when things are sitting pretty, you might be like, yeah, let's do it. Let's get a higher return. When things aren't, you might be like, oh, I don't want to. So take those with a grain of salt. The best way to determine your risk is to try it, right? If you are wanting to figure out your risk tolerance, put your money in something a little bit more risky. Not all of it, just a small percent, and see how you react when something goes wrong, right? I mean, I hate to recommend this because I don't think it's a really good investment. And I'll talk about this. I'll have a whole episode on this sometime. But like, you have like Bitcoin and those types of cryptocurrencies. They're risky. Because they're very volatile, right? Now remember, you own a certain amount, and it only becomes a loss when you sell it. So I mean, the chances of it going back up are decent, but these things spike and drop and spike and drop, and it's pretty volatile. So if you put some money into a coin of some kind, and then you watch how you feel when that plummets and then goes up and plummets and goes up, that's going to help your risk tolerance much better than that's going to help you understand your risk tolerance much better than a quiz ever will. Once again, very small amount of money. Do not put, bet it all in black type of thing. Just, little amount, watch it, and then ask yourself, how do you feel about it going up and down? That's the best way I can think of to determine your actual risk tolerance versus claiming, oh yes, I'm okay with risk, and then freaking out when the bottom drops out. So just keep that in mind. I have learned for myself that, like I'm a little burned, but I still feel like the risk is worth it. So I'm not a very risk adverse person. It's a very interesting thing to learn about myself. But you might be. So keep that in mind before you invest. Know what you're investing in, how risky it is, and how much it will bother you. So that's huge. Okay, the next thing to really to think about before you are investing is, do I know how much money I have on hand to invest? So this might have actually been the first thing to do, but just have a list, spitballing ideas out. We have track your expenses and your income because you need to know what the gap is. If there isn't a gap between your income and expenses, you have to grow the gap before you can invest. I've foolishly invested money and then realized that I invested beyond my budget because I done some numbers wrong. But anyway, the point is that when you invest, you need to make sure you have the cushion to invest because your budget, your daily expenses, that needs to come first. It's really, really important to keep track of your dollars and knowing where every single dollar is going. Especially when we're pretty low paid professionals. Sadly, I know that's a pain point, but if you're not making 150, $200,000, then it's really vital that you are tracking your expenses because there's most likely going to be less cushion. So I would even recommend, like things like the envelope system if you need to really, dial in your expenses, figuring out where every single dollar that you earn is going, and then start investing. And not just having a general idea. There's people that talk about like a 50, 30, 20 budget where you have 50% is your needs, 30% is wants, and 20% is your investments. Well, great, but just kind of doing those broad categories can really be difficult to know the exact amount you can invest. So broader categories is going to be less helpful, at least upfront, dialing in your budget. So consider budgeting in a pretty strict fashion to figure out, okay, this is how much money I have consistently. I'm spending too much. I need to, reduce my expenses. Now, this is how much money I have consistently. I can start investing. So that's a huge thing. It's just making sure you know where every single dollar is going before you get going. Okay, just a few more things to keep in mind as you are preparing to invest. We've already talked about this a little bit with the emergency fund, but just make it automatic, right? We have this idea: pay yourself first before your money even hits your bank account. Even some HRs will allow you to split your paycheck and say, this much of my paycheck is going to go to my emergency fund. Like you can say, like, put $100 or $500 or $1,000 to this bank, and then the rest to this bank, right? They'll do that in a lot of instances, and so that will make it automatic before you even get any dollars in your checking account that you've paid yourself first, and then that money can go into investments or into your emergency fund from there. So that is a very, very powerful tool. And if you can't do that for whatever reason, just setting up an automatic withdrawal. You get paid on the 30th, let's say, have an automatic withdrawal on the 1st. You hardly have a chance to even look at that money before it is gone. So then you have just what's left to work with. Those automatic things will allow yourself to consistently invest without having to think about it. So automation is key. So setting that up front is a great way to invest, because if you have to make the decision to invest every single month, you're not going to do it. But if you do it once when you're in a good frame of mind and it just happens automatically, your investments will happen every time. Okay, next, I would recommend learning. Education about investing is critical. I spend a lot of time, trying to interact with teachers who need help in Facebook groups, and the number one thing is, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't understand how to do this, and they're asking for help, which is great. They're trying to learn. I would say, have you done any learning yourself? Have you listened to podcasts? Have you read books about the subject that you're trying to get help with? because even if I can offer you advice, or not even advice, just, a suggestion. If I can say, hey, I would do this. If you haven't done the foundational learning, you might take some bad suggestions. You might say, oh yeah, that sounds great, and then do it. But if you have that foundational learning, then other people say, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? That's going to be much more powerful in your journey of investing than just tell me what to do, because you won't know if the suggestion you're getting is actually worthwhile. I would recommend reading a book, The Simple Path to Wealth by J.L. Collins. Fantastic book. I'd love for you to use the link that I'll have on my website at teachermoneyshow.com/podcast. You'll be able to find the link to the show notes there. And if you go down to the description of the podcast player, you'll be able to find a link as well to this episode's page exactly. And, have an Amazon affiliate link. It won't cost you anything extra. But it'll allow you to purchase this book and read it and really understand investing. And if you don't want to purchase it, that's okay with me too. I would recommend you see if your library has it, because I'm just trying to help get the information out to you as best I can. So look in the library. The only reason I'd like to purchase it is because I like to write in my books. So you can't do that to a library book. But, getting a book, learning about it, Simple Path to Wealth is one of my favorites. Depending on what you are looking for, though, there are many, many books out there that just talk about different things. I also love Teach and Retire Rich by the guys at 403 Be Wise. Fantastic book because it focuses on teachers. So just keeping in mind these very, very important things are to read and understand basics, at least, before you start asking, what do I do? What do I do? Because that's going to give you the foundation you need to understand the suggestions that you're receiving. And my last suggestion today for you as you are preparing to invest is to get help if needed. I recommend, if you need help, asking a fee-only financial advisor for help. You can also get money coaching. I'd love to be a coach if you just want to work with somebody on like the mindset behind it and getting your budget dialed in. But if you need help figuring out what investments to make, then a fee-only financial advisor is really, really crucial. So I always like to recommend Nectarine. They are an affiliate, so there's that. But they're a great group because it just connects you to a fee-only financial advisor. You get a one-time payment you give to the advisor. They work with you for an hour and they don't sell you anything. This is so important because if you go with the guy that's giving out free donuts in the lunchroom, they're going to say it's free, but then they're going to charge you an asset under management fee. It's going to be 1-2% of your investment portfolio, and $150 versus 1% of 10,000 is going to be about $100, right? So that's going to be every year versus a one-time payment. Might as well just make the one-time payment of $150. So, I recommend them. Like I said, they are affiliate. I get kickback for recommending them. So there's that, but it's pretty obvious why I recommend them. It's good because it's fiduciary, meaning they have promised to keep your best interest in mind, and it's going to cost you less in the long run. And then, of course, if you would like to have coaching, if you want to work with me one-on-one, you can either come on the show by going to teachermoneyshow.com/guest, or we can do coaching one-on-one by going to teachermoneyshow.com/coaching, and we'll be able to, coordinate a time there and then work one-on-one together on anything that you need help with as you are preparing to invest or in your investment journey. I hope that this has been incredibly helpful for you today. Just a quick recap for you of the most important things. The Cliff Notes version. The Cliff Notes version today, by the way, is brought to you by me. This show is made possible by you, the listeners. So I need to know what you want so I can help you. Please go to speakpipe.com/teachermoneyshow and send me a voicemail telling me what you're interested in, what questions you have, and how I can help you specifically. Or you can send me an email at Shaun, SHAUN, at teachermoneyshow.com and say, hey, I'm wondering about this, or can you do an episode about this? I really would love to know what you need to know so I can help you out. All right, here's the Cliff Notes. First, get an emergency fund. Start with a small amount, then build to 3 to 6 months. So that way you can be having a strong foundation for your investments. And remember to do it automatically. 2, eliminate high interest debt. You need to get rid of those debts that are above that 8 to 10% range, because at that point, most investments are not going to be making more than that debt's costing you. 3, determine your objective. What are you actually investing for? That's going to determine what you put your money in. 4, set a timeline. Make sure that you know if it's long or short term that you are trying to invest for, because that's going to also determine what you invest in. You can't invest too short term for a long-term goal, and you can't invest too long-term for a short-term goal. Number 5, determine your risk tolerance. If you are willing to take the risk to get the reward, do it. If you are not, then just stick with the easy stuff, the simple stuff that's going to be less risky. And to determine that, do something a little risky with a little bit of money and see how you feel. 6, track your income and expenses. Budgeting. Knowing how much money you have to invest is crucial to investing. So make sure you have that money set aside in your budget, so that way you know you can put that money into your investments. 7, automate your savings and investing. Just make sure you have it going automatically into your emergency fund account, and then automatically from there into your investments. So that way it's going to happen without you having to think about it. Number 8, learn about investing. Read some books, listen to some podcasts. You can find those resources that I'm going to recommend to you at teachyourmoneyshow.com/podcast, and get help from a coach or from a financial advisor that is a fee-only fiduciary financial advisor. I hope that this information has helped you and that you feel much more prepared to invest. And remember, as a teacher, you're already rich. Your wallet just needs to catch up. Are you worried you won't have enough money to retire? Or maybe you just don't know how you're going to get out of all of this debt. Whatever your situation is, I can help you. Go to teachyourmoneyshow.com/guest and fill out the form there. Then you can come on the show for free coaching, or we can meet one-on-one to discuss your needs. I look forward to talking to you.